the call to silence. Shh, you can rest now. But before that, listen to me. Let your breathing slow down. Let your body unwind. Let the story come in. The darkness of the room envelops my exhausted body. My fingers still feel the weight of the phone I just set down on the nightstand. Dozens of unanswered messages, ignored calls, invitations declined with elaborate excuses that no longer convince anyone, not even me. For the first time in years, I've allowed myself silence. The world outside keeps spinning at its frenzied pace, but in here, in this space I've created for myself, time has a different dimension. I take a deep breath. I feel the air filling my lungs. Once, twice, 3 times. My body relaxes. My mind, still reluctant, begins to quiet. I'm learning to listen to the silence. City sounds drift in through the slightly open window. Distant horns, passers-by chatting, the constant hum of urban life. Before, these sounds would have beckoned me outside. Now they only reinforce my decision to stay in, to pause, to listen to what I never had the courage to hear, my own inner voice, muffled by years of external and internal noise. The empty apartment amplifies my every movement, the creak of the floor beneath my feet, the sound of my breathing, the relentless tick-tock of the wall clock, my mother's birthday gift, which marks not just the hours but also the pace of my new reality. A reality in which I allow time to simply exist, without the constant need to fill it, conquer it, or defeat it. I look at the objects around me, smiling photographs in expensive frames, memories of parties, travels, celebrations. In all of them, I'm smiling. In every single one, I appear to be living the happiest moment of my life. But now I recognize the pattern. The same smile, the same look, the same rehearsed pose. A calculated perfection that seen now seems as artificial as the plastic flowers I kept in my living room for years because I didn't have time to take care of real plants. It wasn't always this way. For so long I was known as the person who never stopped. People said I was cheerful, always cheerful, the life of the party, the one who made others laugh, the one who said it's all good, even with a chest shattered into invisible pieces, the one who carried the world without showing the weight. Memories flow like an overflowing river now that I've let the floodgates open. I remember my childhood, the earliest lessons about who I should be. My mother, always impeccable, even under the toughest circumstances. I remember her receiving the news of my grandfather's death with a phone in one hand and a cup of tea in the other. Not a tear, not a pause, just a, "I see. Thank you for letting me know." Then turning to me with the same smile, asking if I wanted more cookies. That was when I was 7, and I learned that pain should have no place. That difficult emotions should be contained, processed in silence, away from other people's eyes. My father was no different. A practical, resolute man with a ready answer for everything. "Keep your head up, Marina. Problems exist to be solved, not cried over," he would repeat like a mantra whenever he saw me discouraged. And I, so eager for his approval, swallowed my tears, forced a smile, and kept going. I developed, very early on, the skill of turning any negative emotion into something socially acceptable, something that wouldn't bother others or weigh them down. In my teenage years, this skill became my main tool for social survival. While my classmates navigated the storms of that age with emotional outbursts, bathroom crying sessions and heated arguments, I remained the steady rock, the friend everyone sought for advice, the one who listened without judging, the one who always had a word of encouragement, a positive outlook, a practical solution. "I don't know how you manage to be so balanced," they'd say. I would smile, keeping to myself the cost of that apparent balance. During college, I cemented my reputation as the positive one. I organized parties, led projects, balanced classes, work, and a social life with efficiency that impressed everyone. Inside, though, the pressure was mounting. Sleepless nights became common, anxiety attacks that I brushed off as momentary fatigue. The constant feeling I was faking it, always one step ahead of everyone just to maintain the facade. But the show had to go on, and it did, for years. I remember the last big birthday party for Helena, my best friend since college. A packed party hall, loud music, dozens of familiar faces. I was in the center of the group as usual, telling stories, cracking jokes, making sure everyone was having a good time. "Mari, you're amazing," they'd say. "How do you stay so upbeat? I wish I had your energy." And I smiled so much that sometimes my face hurt at the end of the night. But I kept on smiling, because that's what people expected from me. That's what I expected of myself. That particular night, I remember going to the bathroom several times, not to actually use it, but to get a few moments alone, a few seconds to let the smile drop, to allow my face to rest from so much forced expression. I'd look in the mirror and see a stranger, someone wearing a mask so well fitted that I sometimes confused it with my real face. I'd take a deep breath, recompose my smile, and return to the party. It was during one of those trips to the bathroom that I had a moment of frightening clarity. Looking at my reflection in the mirror, I thought, "Who are you?" And I found no answer. It was a fleeting moment, quickly smothered by the sound of someone knocking at the door. But the question lingered like a seed planted that would only sprout much later. That night marked the beginning of something, although I didn't know it at the time. A tiny crack in the carefully built armor. A persistent doubt that refused to be silenced by the same old strategies. I carried on with my life as usual, or what passed for normal for me, but something had changed, like a background hum, almost imperceptible yet impossible to ignore once you'd noticed it. The following months brought significant external changes: a promotion at work, a new apartment, the end of a relationship that no longer made sense, and the beginning of another that looked promising on the surface, but followed the same old patterns. I was the perfect understanding partner who never caused trouble, who adapted to everything without complaint. Outwardly, it looked like everything was going exactly as planned, an upward trajectory for someone who has it all under control. And I believed it. I believed that to be loved meant being cheerful. To be good meant smiling. To be strong meant never crying. I believed in the story I'd built about myself, the persona I'd crafted so meticulously that even I forgot it was only part of me, not my whole being. I grew up hearing my mother say, "Nobody likes sad people, Marina." My father would add, "Crying doesn't solve anything." At school, I quickly learned that smiling girls had more friends. At work, I saw that difficult people rarely got promoted. In relationships, I noticed how men distanced themselves when I showed any sign of fragility. So I built my fortress of joy, brick by brick, year after year. until I became someone everyone loved having around, someone who solved problems without complaining, who never needed help because she was always fine. In hindsight, I realized this wasn't something I did consciously. It was an adaptation, a social survival mechanism that became as automatic as breathing, a response to all the subtle and explicit messages I received throughout my life about what it means to be a successful, well-liked, well-adjusted woman in this society. Smile more. Complain less. Don't be difficult. Don't be too much. Don't be intense. Don't be heavy. Be light. Be easy. Be what others need you to be. And it worked for a while. This strategy opened doors, brought me admiration, let me navigate professional and personal settings with an ease that many envied. "How do you handle pressure so well?" co-workers would ask during tight deadlines. "How do you keep such a positive energy all the time?" friends wondered during tough periods. I'd respond with platitudes about inner strength, natural optimism, resilience, lines I'd gathered from self-help books, motivational talks, inspirational social media posts, lines I repeated so often I nearly believed them. Even my romantic relationships followed the same pattern. I attracted men who loved my lightness, my positivity, my knack for being drama-free. They'd put me on a pedestal for being unlike other women, those who complained, demanded, complicated, and I, desperate to keep up that image, swallowed frustrations, suppressed needs, and ignored warning signs. Also, I could stay the perfect partner. Never a burden, always fine, always understanding, forever forgiving. I recall an ex-boyfriend, Pedro, admiringly saying, "It's amazing how you never make a fuss. Other women would have flipped out in this situation." He'd forgotten my birthday, coming home hours after the dinner I'd prepared, without even noticing the significance of the day, and I, of course, smiled and said it didn't matter, that I understood how busy he was. Inside, the disappointment ate away at me, but on the outside I held it together. The relationship lasted 2 more years, with Pedro repeatedly crossing boundaries I never set, trampling on feelings I never voiced. When it finally ended, he seemed genuinely confused. But everything was fine between us, he said, and I couldn't explain that nothing had been fine for a very long time, because I'd maintained the very illusion that now trapped us. But the body knows. It always knows. And it began to show signs. Persistent fatigue, sleepless nights, followed by days of exhaustion, frequent headaches, unexplained stomach aches, anxiety attacks I disguised as feeling a bit off, silence that bothered me, eyes that smiled but did not sparkle. The body is wise, wiser than the mind that tries to fool it. It has its own language, its own alerts, which can't be silenced with rationalizations or distractions for long. First came the allergies, sudden, inexplicable. My skin, previously flawless, yet another thing I prided myself on controlling, started reacting. Red patches, itching, swelling. I consulted doctors, did exams, got inconclusive diagnoses. It might be stress, they said, with that look doctors have when they suspect the issue is more psychological than physical. And of course, I denied it. Stress? Me? The most balanced person everyone knew? Impossible. Then came the insomnia. Entire nights staring at the ceiling, mind racing, body exhausted but unable to shut down. Thoughts circling like vultures around a carcass. endless mental lists, worrying in advance about presentations, meetings, social events, replaying past conversations, imagining future scenarios, the hours passing, the alarm getting closer, the anxiety growing over the lack of rest that would undermine my performance the next day. Sleeping pills that worked for a few nights, then stopped having an effect. Alcohol to slow my mind down, followed by more insomnia once it wore off. A vicious cycle that only deepened. Next came the pain. Muscular aches I blamed on a new workout routine. Headaches I blamed on poor posture at work. Stomach pains blamed on erratic eating habits. I offered up a rational explanation for every symptom, letting me ignore the real underlying cause, until the pains became such constant companions that I considered them part of me. It's normal, I told myself. Everyone hurts, everyone's tired. It's part of adult life. Just another layer of denial over a body that was screaming for attention. My body was doing what my mind refused to do. Acknowledge that something was fundamentally wrong. Not with my stomach, my skin, or my muscles. Something was wrong with how I lived, with the person I pretended to be, with the story I told myself. A brief visit to a dermatologist was especially revealing. After examining my unexplained skin eruptions, she asked me gently, disarming me completely, "Are you under a lot of stress, Marina?" I started to give my usual, "No, everything's fine," but something made me stop. Maybe it was her look, someone who'd seen many patients like me. Maybe it was that I was too tired to keep performing. Maybe it was that little crack in the armor spreading. Whatever it was, for the first time in years I answered honestly, "Yes, I'm very tired." My voice broke on the last word, and I felt tears welling up. Tears I quickly suppressed, ashamed to show vulnerability even in a clinical setting. She nodded, as if confirming something she already knew. "Your body speaks when your mind stays silent," she said, prescribing not just a cream for my outbreaks, but also suggesting I consider therapy. I thanked her, took the prescription, and promised to think about it. But as soon as I left her office, I threw away the paper with the psychologist's referral. I don't need that, I thought. I'm not that bad off. Everyone has problems. I'm just tired. I need a vacation, a better diet, more exercise, more rationalizations, more denial, more attempts to control the uncontrollable. But the seed had been planted. The idea that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't really okay, began to germinate slowly, and with that came an avalanche of questions I'd avoided for so long. If I wasn't okay, what did that mean for the image I'd built? For the relationships based on that image? For my identity, so intrinsically tied to being the strong one, the positive one, the unshakable one? I started canceling commitments, something I never did. I began ignoring messages, whereas I'd always answer promptly. I avoided people when I used to always want to be surrounded by them. The questions started popping up. "Are you okay, Mari? Did something happen? You don't seem like yourself." And for the first time, the automatic answer, "I'm fine," didn't come so easily. There was a hesitation, a pause before the rehearsed reply, as if a part of me were too tired to keep up the act, as if my internal defense mechanism were finally breaking down after years of overuse, and that terrified me. Because if I wasn't the cheerful, positive, balanced person everyone knew, who was I? Questions from others intensified as my facade developed increasingly visible cracks. A boss worried about my sudden lack of interest in projects I used to love. a friend puzzled by my repeated declining of invitations, a boyfriend thrown off by my silence during dinner. Everyone sensed something was wrong, but none of them really knew how to ask or approach it, and I had no idea how to answer, even if they did ask directly, because explaining it to them would first require admitting it to myself, and I wasn't ready. The breakdown was building gradually, like a wave forming far from shore, gaining strength and size as it approaches. Small moments of loss of control, tears that came out of nowhere while I was driving to work, sudden waves of panic in seemingly unimportant meetings, fits of disproportionate anger at minor inconveniences, the spilled coffee, the red light, the email that didn't go through, signs I ignored, dismissed, rationalized, until the wave finally crashed. It happened on a regular Tuesday, coming home from work when I collapsed. No dramatic event, no specific tragedy. I just walked into my empty apartment, closed the door, and fell onto the living room floor, overwhelmed by sobs that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. I cried for hours, until there were no more tears, until my body shook with exhaustion, until my throat ached from sobbing. And that was where, at the bottom of that smiling void, she appeared. Sadness. Not the kind that drags you under, but the kind that whispers, "Come home." A sadness that didn't come to destroy me, but to show me something I'd long forgotten. That feeling is part of existing. That pain isn't the enemy of life, but an essential component of it. It was a moment of complete surrender, of letting go, of giving up fighting something that had been there all along, patiently waiting to be acknowledged, like an old visitor who stands at the door ignored until you finally invite them in. And contrary to what I feared, it wasn't devastating. It was almost a relief. Like letting go of a weight you've carried so long you forgot what it felt like not to carry it. Sitting on the living room floor, my face still streaked from tears, I felt a clarity I'd never experienced. A strange lucidity that comes after you pass through a dark tunnel of emotion. I looked at the walls of my apartment, at the perfectly coordinated decor, the carefully chosen objects intended to project an image of a sophisticated, successful life. Everything looked so empty, so devoid of any real meaning. For the first time, I admitted to myself, I'm tired. I'm so tired. Not just physically, though that was true too. Tired to my very soul. Tired of pretending. Tired of smiling when I wanted to cry. Tired of saying I'm fine when nothing was fine. Tired of being who I thought I needed to be in order to be accepted, loved, valued. In the days that followed, I remained in an almost catatonic state. I called work and asked for a few days of medical leave, something I had never done. Health problems, I said vaguely, feeling both guilty and relieved for the lie that wasn't really a lie. I turned off my phone, drew the curtains, stayed in bed staring at the ceiling, allowing myself to feel everything I'd suppressed for so long. It was both terrible and liberating, like ripping off a bandage covering an untreated wound. It hurt, but it was necessary for real healing. Days turned into a week of self-imposed silence, a week of facing my own emptiness, a week in which I let tears flow whenever they wanted, let rage erupt without judgment, let fear surface without immediately silencing it with upbeat self-talk. A week of simply existing, without trying to control, direct, or alter the experience. It wasn't an easy week. The mind, conditioned to be constantly in motion, planning, solving, doing, fought fiercely against surrender. I was often tempted to revert to old patterns, turn on my phone, check my email, resume normal life, pretend my breakdown was just a passing moment of weakness, the guilt of wasting time when there was so much to do, the sense of irresponsibility at simply stopping, the fear that if I allowed this pause to continue, I'd never be able to regain control. But something stronger kept me in that state, a deep intuition that this breakdown wasn't the problem, but the beginning of the solution, that this apparent unraveling wasn't a destruction, but an opening, a crack through which light could finally shine in. When I started emerging from my initial inertia, I still wasn't ready to reconnect with the outside world, but I needed something to occupy my mind, which was starting to spin in circles, rehashing the same thoughts obsessively. That's when I remembered the small shelf of books in the guest room. Books I'd never had time to read, collected more as decorative items than sources of knowledge. I looked through the titles slowly, without rush or any specific goal. One title caught my eye: Man and His Symbols, a book by Carl Jung, a gift from a psychology major friend in college. "You have to read this," she'd told me. "It makes you think about who we really are beneath our masks." I had thanked her, placed it on the shelf, and never thought about it again, until now. This was when I found Jung, or maybe he found me, a forgotten book on the shelf, a gift from a friend years ago that I never had time for. Man and His Symbols. I started leafing through it with little interest, just seeking something to occupy my restless mind. Then I came across this passage: "The persona is what we would like to be and how we want to be seen by the world. But it is not ourselves." And I cried, not out of pain, but out of truth, out of recognition, out of relief in realizing I wasn't crazy, that what I was feeling had a name, a history, a meaning. Jung described the persona, this social mask we all wear to adapt to the outside world, but warned of the danger in confusing the persona with our whole self. It was exactly what I'd done. My perpetual cheer, my unshakable strength, my constant optimism, these were only parts of me, not my entire being. Jung's words spanned decades to find me exactly when I needed them. They spoke directly to my experience, as if he had observed me, understood me, and left a map so I could find myself again. I read and reread that passage, underlined it, copied it into a notebook. Words that named what I'd intuitively felt, but never managed to articulate. The persona, Jung wrote, is a complicated system of relations between individual consciousness and society. A kind of mask designed on the one hand to make a certain impression on others, and on the other to conceal the true nature of the individual. That was it. The perfect definition of what I had built over the years. A mask so convincing it fooled not only others, but myself as well. A mask that served the purpose of making me acceptable, lovable, admirable in the eyes of others. A mask that hid not only my weaknesses, but also my authenticity, my truth, my essence. I continued exploring Jung's writings in the weeks that followed. I discovered concepts like the shadow, anima, animus, individuation. Each page was like a mirror reflecting parts of me that I had hidden, even from myself. I began to understand that the sadness consuming me was not an enemy to be defeated, but a message from my true self demanding to be heard. In Jungian theory, I was particularly drawn to the idea of the shadow. Jung described the shadow as the part of us we reject, push into the unconscious out of fear, shame, or social conformity. But the shadow doesn't vanish simply because we ignore it. On the contrary, the more we deny it, the more power it gains to influence our behavior in ways we don't understand. I realized that my sadness, my vulnerability, my needs, my anger, all these parts I had relegated to the shadow in order to be positive and balanced, were clamoring for integration. They demanded acknowledgement, acceptance, expression. Constantly repressing these emotions had created such a massive reservoir that it finally overflowed, so I could no longer ignore it. The cheerfulness I faked was my armor, but it was also my prison, a prison of my own making, believing I was protecting myself when in fact I was suffocating. And the sadness I feared was my soul asking for comfort, my inner being crying out for attention, care, recognition. I began to see that true strength wasn't about never showing weakness, contrary to what I'd been taught, but about having the courage to embrace all parts of myself, including those society deems negative or undesirable. True resilience wasn't about constantly smiling no matter what, but about allowing myself to feel the full range of emotions, even when it hurt. True authenticity wasn't about always being pleasant, but about being honest with others, and especially with myself. I began slowly peeling away layers of my persona. It was a painful, disorienting, and lonely process. I had to figure out which aspects of my cheerful personality were genuine and which were just defense mechanisms. I had to learn to say no without feeling guilty, to express discomfort without fearing rejection, to show vulnerability without feeling weak. Many people in my life didn't understand this transformation. Some drifted away, uncomfortable with this new, less fun version of me. Others tried to cheer me up, as if sadness were an illness to cure. Only a few really understood that what was happening wasn't a crisis or a simple depression, though I went through that too, but an awakening, a rebirth. Helena, my oldest friend, struggled with this new version of me. "I don't get what's happening to you, Mari," she said on one of our rare meetings during that time. "You've always been so alive. Now you seem to have lost your spark." Her words hurt, not because they were cruel, but because they showed how much our friendship had been built around my persona, not my true self. To her, I was deteriorating, but to me, I was finally beginning to heal. My mother also didn't understand. On a quick visit, she looked around my apartment, masking her worry poorly. She noticed the stack of psychology and philosophy books on my coffee table, the newly acquired plants, my lack of the usual makeup. "You seem different," she said, as if observing an illness. "I'm more real," I replied. She sighed, clearly unsettled by my answer. For a woman who had dedicated her life to maintaining appearances, the idea of discarding the mask wasn't just strange, it was threatening. "I just don't want you to isolate yourself," she said at last. "People will worry." What she really meant was, "I don't want you to stop being who you've always been for me, who I taught you to be." My romantic relationship didn't survive this transformation. Ricardo, whom I'd been seeing for almost 2 years, grew more and more frustrated with my changes. "You used to be so spontaneous," he complained, "so easygoing. Now you're always pensive, distant." What he called spontaneous was my constant emotional availability for him, my flexibility to his needs, my willingness to set aside my own desires for his. What he called easygoing was my refusal to bring any weight or complexity to the relationship. The breakup was painful but necessary. I realized that our relationship, like so many before it, had been built on my willingness to be what the other person needed, not on genuine connection between two whole people. But not all connections deteriorated. Some, surprisingly, grew deeper. People with whom I'd had only superficial bonds revealed themselves capable of a deeper connection once I started showing my authenticity. Colleagues I barely knew offered words of understanding when I admitted to going through a hard time. Neighbors went beyond polite greetings once I stopped presenting only a smiling face. It was as though by showing my vulnerability, I created a space where others could be more authentic too. And then there were those few friends who, although initially confused by my transformation, chose to stay, chose to try understanding. They began asking genuine questions, really listening, opening themselves to the idea of knowing me all over again, more fully. Those relationships, fewer in number, became infinitely more nourishing. I realized I'd rather have a few true connections than many superficial ones. I'd rather be seen wholly by some than be admired partially by many. I started listening to her. Sadness. She never shouted or made a scene. She only said, "Stop, sit, acknowledge me." And I did. I stopped. I sat. And I acknowledged. I recognized there was wisdom in her, a depth my superficial cheer had never allowed me to explore. I created daily rituals for feeling my emotions. Sometimes anger emerged, anger at having repressed so much of myself for so long. Sometimes fear of not being accepted if I wasn't the easygoing and light person everyone knew. Sometimes a sadness so deep it felt bottomless. But there were also moments of a different kind of joy. Not the performative cheer I used to rely on, but a genuine delight born of the freedom to be my whole self. I set aside time in my day to simply feel, to write in a journal, letting words flow without judgment or worry about style, just raw expression. To meditate, not aiming for an empty mind or inner peace as I'd tried before, but simply to be present with whatever arose. To move my body in ways that matched my emotions, dancing freely when I felt joy, walking slowly when I was contemplative, doing intense yoga poses when anger needed physical expression. I also started reading voraciously, not just Jung, but authors who spoke about individuality, authenticity, and the path to one's true self. James Hollis, Clarissa Pinkola Estes, Thomas More, Marion Woodman, Robert Johnson. Each offered perspectives on this archetypal journey of descending into the depths and returning transformed. I discovered my experience, though unique in its specific details, followed a familiar pattern, a path many had walked before me, a journey recognized by countless spiritual and psychological traditions as essential for full human development. Jung called this process individuation, the path toward becoming an integrated individual, distinct from the collective psyche, conscious of both its luminous and shadowy qualities. A process that inevitably involves confronting the hardest, most disowned aspects of ourselves, a process requiring the courage to challenge not just others' expectations, but also our own self-deceptions. Sadness revealed itself not as an enemy, but as a teacher, a goddess who appears only in the dark, a night that heals. She taught me depth, showed me dimensions of life I'd never explored while I was too busy running from one point to another, always smiling, always fine. She told me, "You don't have to smile anymore to be loved. You just have to be." And in that simplicity lay my liberation. Just be. With all my contradictions, complexities, light and shadow. No filters, no masks, no impossible expectations to meet. That lesson didn't come in a burst of revelation, but as a gradual understanding that deepened daily. Every time I dared to express a difficult emotion and still felt worthy of love. Every time I said no to something that clashed with my true self, and the world didn't collapse. Every time I shared my vulnerability and found not rejection, but deeper connection. Small daily confirmations that it was safe to be real, that my value didn't hinge on my performance, that there were people who could love me not despite my complexities, but because of them. One of the most meaningful moments of this journey happened in a park, alone watching the sunset. A gentle sadness settled over me, not the desperate sadness of before, but a sweet kind of melancholy, an acknowledgement of the beauty and impermanence of life. I allowed tears to flow freely as the sky shifted from blue to orange, pink and purple. A couple passed by and saw my tear-stained face. Rather than give me a pitying or awkward glance, the woman offered me a kind smile, a look of understanding as if saying, "I know, I get it." It was a fleeting, profound human connection that etched itself into my memory. A stranger recognizing my vulnerability, not as something to hide, but as something to honor. A small moment of grace confirming what I was beginning to suspect. Our shared humanity isn't found in polished masks, but in the courage to show our scars. Gradually, as I grew more comfortable in my authenticity, I re-emerged into the world, not as the person I'd been, always available, always agreeable, always living up to others' expectations, but as someone with clear boundaries, genuine needs, and a voice that didn't always say what others wanted to hear. I went back to work, but negotiated a setup that allowed for more balance. I restarted some friendships, but under different terms, more honest and reciprocal. I considered romantic relationships again, but with a much clearer idea of who I was and what I needed in a partnership. I slowly returned to my social life, this time on my own terms, consciously choosing where and with whom to spend my energy. Some friendships grew deeper through this new authenticity. Others, which were superficial, naturally fell away. At work, I drew clear lines. In relationships, I learned to share my needs and vulnerabilities, and surprisingly, the world didn't end. People didn't abandon me en masse. Some did, but the ones who really mattered drew closer. I still smile, but now there's space inside. There's a hush between my teeth. There's presence behind my eyes. My smile is no longer a mask, but a genuine expression of joy when joy is truly there. And when it's not, I allow myself to express whatever emotion is present in me at that moment. Now my smile has roots that reach deep. It's no longer that shallow, automatic expression, disconnected from my real feelings. It's a smile that comes from a place of truth, carrying all my experiences, happy and painful. A smile that doesn't deny sadness, but includes it and is enriched by it. a smile that doesn't have to be constant to be real. I've learned to move between two worlds, the external and the internal, to dance in the light and in the dark, to realize I'm made not just of acceptable, desirable parts, but of the full range of human experiences and emotions, and that denying any part of that spectrum is denying life itself. My relationships with others have transformed as well. When I stopped projecting a perfect image and hiding my vulnerabilities, I created a space where they could also be real. I discovered my authenticity didn't push people away as I'd feared. On the contrary, it invited deeper, more genuine, more satisfying connections. Superficial conversations made way for meaningful exchanges. Relationships based on mutual admiration gave way to relationships based on mutual understanding. The constant fear of disappointing others was replaced by the freedom to be imperfect. Early on, I was afraid this journey toward authenticity would turn me into a bitter, negative, heavy person, afraid of losing my capacity for joy and lightness. But I found the opposite. By embracing all my parts, including the painful, ugly, challenging ones, I discovered a deeper and more genuine source of joy. A joy not dependent on external circumstances, that doesn't need to be performed, one that simply exists as a natural part of life's rhythm. In my loneliest moments, I found comfort in solitude itself, feeling the presence of something greater than me. Call it the collective unconscious, spirituality, ancestry, or simply the interconnectedness of all beings. I felt part of a lineage of people who, throughout human history, had plunged into the depths of themselves and come back with pearls of wisdom. Now, before going to bed, I no longer flee from sadness. I embrace it, like welcoming a forgotten sister, a guardian. I acknowledge its presence, listen to its message, receive its gift. Sometimes it warns me I'm on the wrong path. Sometimes it links me to ancestral pains that need healing. Sometimes it simply comes to balance joy, the way night balances day. My bedroom is now a sanctuary, not just a place to rest my body, but also to nurture my soul. I've created simple rituals to honor my emotions, all of them. A lit candle to symbolize the light that remains even in the dark. A journal where I let words flow uncensored. Moments of meditation to simply observe whatever arises without judgment. In this sacred space I've created, I allow myself to shed all the layers I've accumulated during the day. Not just the physical clothes, but also the emotional postures, the automatic reactions, the small performative acts that still show up when I interact with the world. Here I can be absolutely real, completely present. I can exist without effort, without purpose, without direction. Just be in the purity of this moment, in the stillness of the night when all external noise finally ceases. I'm face to face with my own soul. No more escapes, no more distractions, just me and my essential truth. And in that encounter, which used to terrify me, I now find an endless source of strength, wisdom, and peace. Not the superficial peace of denial, but the deep peace that comes from being fully present, fully engaged with reality as it is. This is my call to silence, an invitation to slow down, to listen, to feel. A reminder that behind every mask we wear is a whole complex being, magnificent in its totality, and that true healing doesn't come from repressing parts of ourselves, but from welcoming them with compassion and curiosity. Looking back, I see how my personal journey also reflects a collective journey. We live in a society that values productivity above well-being, appearance over essence, constant doing over simply being. We're bombarded with messages glorifying outward success while neglecting inner growth. We're encouraged to share only the highlights of our lives, creating a collective illusion that everyone is always happy, fulfilled, complete, except us. This illusion is especially harmful for women, conditioned from an early age to prioritize others' needs, to be pleasant, not to take up too much emotional space. How many of us grew up hearing we needed to smile more, complain less, not be difficult? How many of us internalize the belief that our worth depends on being light, agreeable, adaptable? How many of us built perfect personas while stifling our inner truths? By allowing myself to embrace my shadows, I found not just personal healing, but a way to resist a system that fragments us. Each time I choose authenticity over performance, each time I respect my limits rather than pretend to surpass them, I say no to a model of living that makes us collectively ill. And I've found that authenticity is contagious. When I allow myself to be vulnerable, I create space for others to do the same. When I express my sadness without shame, I give others permission to acknowledge and express theirs. It's as if every small act of emotional honesty chips away at that collective facade of perfection, letting more genuine light in, not the artificial glare of filters and facades. Sometimes people ask if I'm happy now. It used to be an anxiety-inducing question, implying happiness is a permanent state, a final destination you reach and maintain. Now I answer, I am whole. Wholeness doesn't mean perfect, resolved, or always peaceful. It means inhabited by joy and sadness, certainty and doubt, strength and fragility. It means alive in every dimension life offers. My relationship with time has changed too. I used to constantly race against it, trying to pack as much as possible into every minute, terrified of wasting even the smallest moment. Now I realize some periods in life call for expansion, activity, expression, while others call for retreat, stillness, gestation. I honor these cycles, just as I honor the seasons, each with its purpose, its beauty, its wisdom. In my conversations with solitude, I found a rich source of self-knowledge, not the solitude of abandonment or lack, but a sacred space to meet myself. A space where, free from other people's projections and expectations, I can hear my own voice more clearly, where I can distinguish between the desires that truly arise from my being and those imposed from outside. In that silence, I've rediscovered the forgotten art of contemplation. Simply being present, watching life unfold within and around me, watching thoughts arise and dissolve, emotions ebb and flow, the constant dance between who I am and who I am always becoming. There's an ancient wisdom in this practice, one our ancestors understood, a different way of relating to time, to nature, to the mystery. A wisdom our hyper-connected, hyper-stimulated society systematically overlooks, to our own detriment. My relationships have changed too. I realize that when I allow myself to be seen in my entirety, with both my light and my darkness, I attract people who can truly love me, not just a polished version of myself. I've also learned to see others with more compassion, recognizing that behind every social mask and every challenging behavior is a whole human being seeking connection, acceptance, belonging. At work, I stopped chasing constant validation and started looking for purpose. The difference is subtle but profound. Validation comes from outside. Purpose arises from within. Validation demands we mold ourselves to external expectations. Purpose demands we follow our internal compass, even if that path isn't universally recognized or celebrated. During my hardest moments, when sadness overwhelms me or loneliness weighs heavier than I can bear, I remember Jung's words, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." I understand that every moment of emotional discomfort is also an opportunity to grow, that each wound can open a door to deeper understanding, that every crisis is an invitation to greater integration. I've learned to distinguish between necessary and unnecessary suffering. Necessary suffering is the kind that accompanies growth, signaling transformation and moving us toward greater awareness. Unnecessary suffering is what we create through resistance, denial, repression. What I did when I insisted on maintaining the mask of perpetual happiness, even when it no longer fit. And perhaps most importantly, I've learned to tell the difference between authentic joy and false cheer. False cheer is performative, reliant on external approval, shallow. Authentic joy is almost quiet, a subterranean current that flows even in tough times, a trust in life that endures even when circumstances are challenging. This is the joy I know now, not by eliminating sadness, but by dancing with it, not by avoiding the dark, but by learning to see in it, not by running from loneliness, but by discovering within it an endless source of self-knowledge and renewal. And so, in the stillness of the night, when the world's noise finally quiets, when I'm alone with my truest self, I can finally say, with genuine conviction, I'm okay. Not because everything is perfect, not because there's no pain or challenge, but because I understand that everything, the good and the difficult, the light and the heavy, the bright and the shadowy, is part of the journey toward becoming whole. That's what silence taught me. That's the wisdom sadness brought me. This is the gift I now offer you. So when night falls and you find yourself alone with your thoughts, remember, darkness isn't your enemy. It's the womb from which all creation emerges, the space where dreams are born, the womb of your own rebirth. Sleep in peace, and if in your dreams you receive a visitor, sadness, loneliness, emptiness, don't fight it. Don't resist. Tell it you've heard. Say, I remember you, and let it lead you back home, back to yourself, back to the wholeness of your being, because it's in the embrace of light and shadow that we find our true nature. It's in the dance between joy and sadness that we experience the fullness of life. It's in the silence between words that we discover our most authentic voice. Shh. You can rest now. Let your breathing slow. Let your body unwind. Let the truth come in. Silence isn't absence, it's presence. A presence that's complete, attentive, aware. Silence isn't emptiness, it's fullness, full of possibilities, meanings, revelations. Silence isn't death, it's the cradle of life, of creativity, of transformation. It was in silence that I found all the voices I had silenced within me. It was in the pause that I found the true rhythm of my existence. It was in the darkness that I found the stars that have always guided me, invisible in the light of day. When I stopped running from silence, when I stopped fearing it as a bottomless pit, It revealed itself as a temple, a sacred place where all parts of me could finally gather, where integration, so dear a word to Jung, could happen, not as an abstract concept but as a lived experience. Individuation, that process of becoming oneself, isn't a destination, but a continuous journey. It's not about achieving some idealized state of perfection or permanent enlightenment. It's about becoming increasingly aware, increasingly present, increasingly able to live our own lives with authenticity and purpose. Every day, I continue discovering new layers of myself, new areas where the persona still holds sway, new shadows asking to be brought into the light. The difference is that now I see this process not as a threat to my identity, but as life's own movement expressing itself through me, inviting me into constant expansion of awareness and compassion. I'm learning day by day that life isn't about avoiding pain, but about embracing it as a fundamental part of being human. It's not about always being okay, but about being present for everything that arises. It's not about finding definitive answers, but about living the questions with curiosity and courage. I still stumble sometimes, on days when the perpetual smile mask tries to reattach itself to my face. Days when my old habit of saying I'm fine resurfaces, even though I'm not. But now I notice these moments. I observe them kindly, without judgment, understanding that decades of conditioning won't vanish overnight. In these moments of relapse, rather than scold myself for failing at authenticity, I practice self-compassion. I recognize that even slipping back into the persona briefly is part of the journey. That personal growth is not linear but a spiral. We revisit the same themes at ever deeper levels of understanding. And when I notice I'm wearing the mask again, I don't rip it off violently. Instead, I gently acknowledge it, thank it for the protection it once offered, and carefully remove it, reaffirming my commitment to truth, to my truth. Some people ask if it was worth it, this painful, difficult, uncomfortable journey toward authenticity, as if there were a real choice, as if staying trapped in the persona, disconnected from my true self, were a viable long-term option. All I can say is it wasn't a choice but a necessity. The call to silence doesn't invite, it summons. And once you're summoned, you can either answer consciously or be dragged there by the inevitable collapse of your defenses. The price of authenticity is high. Lost relationships, disappointed expectations, relinquished comforts. But the price of inauthenticity is even higher. A life not lived, a self not realized, a potential never expressed. The real choice isn't between comfort and discomfort, but between the temporary discomfort of transformation and the chronic pain of self-betrayal. When people ask where to begin, I suggest starting with silence. Not the forced silence of repression, but the attentive silence of listening. Listening to the body with its coded messages in sensations and symptoms, listening to emotions, even inconvenient or negative ones, listening to dreams with their symbolic language linking the conscious and unconscious, listening to intuition, that soft voice we so often ignore in favor of louder, more insistent, more socially validated voices. I suggest cultivating curiosity about yourself, observing your behavioral patterns, automatic reactions, and emotional triggers with the same interest you'd give a fascinating book or a captivating movie. Asking yourself, with every decision, reaction, choice, Does this come from my true self or my persona? Does this serve my authenticity or my need for approval? Does this feed my soul or simply maintain my social image? I suggest practicing small acts of authenticity, saying no when your body resists, even if your mind gives you 1,000 reasons to say yes. Expressing a difficult emotion, even when an internal voice insists it's drama or weakness. Admitting a mistake, a vulnerability or a need, even if your ego screams that it will shatter your carefully built image. I suggest seeking trustworthy mirrors, people, practices, or places that reflect not just your polished persona, but your whole self. People who can hold space for your complexity without trying to oversimplify it. Practices that help you connect with neglected parts of yourself. Places where you can take off your masks and breathe authentically, if only for a few moments. And most of all, I suggest compassion. Compassion for yourself as you traverse this uncharted territory, stumbling, backsliding, moving forward, learning. Compassion for others who, like you, are locked in their own armor, protecting vulnerable hearts the best way they know how. Compassion for our shared humanity, caught between a deep longing for authentic connection and a paralyzing fear of rejection. I'm reminded of a line by Rumi that I came across on my journey. Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. If I replace love with true self, I find a perfect description of the individuation process. It's not about creating something new, but removing the barriers, preventing what's already there, what has always been there, from finally blossoming. That's what silence taught me, what sadness revealed to me, what this journey toward authenticity continues to show me. All the parts of me that I denied, rejected, or buried don't need to be conquered or created. They're already there, waiting patiently to be acknowledged, integrated, loved. And that's what I offer you now, not as a guru or expert, but as a fellow traveler, a witness that it's possible to pass through the dark valley and emerge not cured in the simplistic sense our culture peddles, but transformed, not happily ever after, but deeply alive, not free from pain, but able to weave it into a richer, more genuine, more complete life. This account is not an exact map. Each person's journey to authenticity is unique, with its own challenges, revelations, and moments of grace. But maybe it can serve as a small light, a whisper of encouragement when the path seems too dark, when the temptation to return to the security of the persona feels nearly overwhelming. Let yourself hear the call to silence. Allow yourself to occupy that empty space that opens up when distractions end, when performances cease, when masks are gently removed. In that space, which at first may feel terrifying in its vastness, you won't find the void you feared, but the fullness you've always sought. And remember, you're not alone on this journey. Others have come before, others will follow. We are all pilgrims on the same path, seeking the same treasure. That deep connection, that essential wholeness, that liberating truth at the center of our being. Sometimes I wonder what the world would be like if more people answered this call. If authenticity were valued over performance, vulnerability recognized as strength instead of weakness, silence revered as a sacred space rather than feared as emptiness. I imagine communities where we could show up in our truth without fear of judgment or rejection. I imagine a culture that celebrates not just shine and achievement, but depth and transformation. I imagine relationships not grounded in mutual projection and expectation, but in presence and acceptance. It may sound utopian in a world that prizes speed over depth, image over essence, and external success over internal fulfillment. Yet I believe every personal act of authenticity contributes to collective transformation. Each person with the courage to remove their masks makes it easier for others to do the same. Every voice speaking its truth helps break the communal silence. Every heart that embraces its own shadow helps illuminate the way for others. Perhaps that's the real healing. Not just individual but collective, not just psychological but cultural. A healing that begins with that simple but revolutionary moment when we stop running from silence and start listening to it. When we stop fearing sadness and start recognizing it as a teacher. When we stop performing happiness and begin embodying authenticity. The sun is rising now. Its first rays slip through the window, gently touching the objects in my room that have become altars in my personal temple. Jung's book on the nightstand, my journal filled with confessions, revelations, discoveries, and a photo of my younger self, bright-eyed, truly smiling, before the world taught me to wear masks. I take a deep breath and prepare for another day. I don't know what it will bring. Joys or sorrows, successes or challenges, connections or loneliness. I only know I'll be present for it all, that I won't hide behind the persona if things get uncomfortable, that I'll honor each emotion, each thought, each sensation as a valuable messenger from my deepest self. And I know that when night comes again after the day's battles and blessings, I'll return to this sacred space. I'll return to silence. I'll return home, the real home, which is not a physical place, but a state of being, a state of complete presence, radical authenticity, profound connection to every dimension of my being. Sleep in peace, and dream of your own wholeness, your own truth, your own path back home. Shh. You can rest now. The story ends here, but your journey, the real journey, is only beginning. Each time you choose truth over convenience, authenticity over approval, and thoughtful silence over distracting noise, each time you say yes to your own integrity and no to demands that fragment your being, each time you honor your sadness as a messenger, not an enemy, the call to silence is always there, murmuring beneath the roar of daily life, waiting patiently for you to stop, listen, feel, for you to realize that beyond all the roles you play, the personas you wear, the stories you tell about yourself, there is a whole, real and alive self that deserves to be known, honored, fully lived. Listen, silence is calling. It's time to go home.